Good morning. I'm Jim Csek with Kelowna Now, and on the phone with me, Ian Burns, our managing editor, all the way from Ottawa. We got to look at the traffic flowing this morning. Looks like a beautiful day in the Okanagan. We're going to start off the day with how Canada can hit back at the U.S. where it hurts in the fight against Trump's tariffs and iPhones. I'm not sure how that works there, Ian. You there?
Apparently, well, according to an analyst, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yep.
According to one of these analysts, whose job it is, I guess, to look at such things, he seems to think that that would harm Donald Trump and that would upset Tim Cook, and then that would immediately feed back to Donald Trump. But I do feel that if tariffs were put on iPhones, I don't think there would be less of a market for iPhones. I think Canadians would just pay even more than they already do.
Yeah, that's like grasping at straws or grasping at iPhones. How's that? I'll go with grasping at iPhones. This is a strange one. Australia Senate passes social media ban for kids under 16, and it'll become the world's first law.
Yeah, I mean, it is like a bit extreme, but I can certainly understand why.
Yeah.
There's countless studies out there, like pretty serious research
Mm-hmm.
that suggests that it causes huge amounts of damage, especially to young
Yeah.
girls. But it isn't just young girls, because obviously there's this epidemic of boys as well who
Yeah.
end up killing themselves because they're threatened with being exposed for usually some
Yeah,
sort
like
of
they say
sexual deed.
body dysmorphia was kind of like really was females that were feeling a lot of it. Now it's boys, and they're starting to take steroids and all kinds of things to kind of like make it on social media there. But a lot of the platforms have a 13-year-old age plus thing. But I guess this puts some teeth to it, right? With fines, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that those age requirements are ludicrous anyway, aren't they? Because all you have to do is
Yeah,
choose a year. So just
yeah. It's
choose a year in the '70s
nobody's
or the '80s or
validating
something.
anything, right?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I can even remember back when I was a kid doing that kind of thing. And it's also sometimes websites even will say, "Are you 19?" Because this is a website about alcohol or something. It's like obviously 15-year-olds are just going to say, "Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
19."
yeah. And then comparing recent crime trends, Canada and the United States, property and violent crimes now higher in Canada than the U.S. That's a grim stat.
Yeah, it is. It's quite terrible, and it traces it back about sort of 10 years,
Hmm.
and that's when it started. I mean, America obviously is. Don't think anybody will be surprised that it has a higher murder rate or homicide rate, as they call it. But it is quite interesting, isn't it? And if you read that study from the Fraser Institute, a lot of
Yeah.
it, goes into how there is a kind of assumption, isn't there, that Canada is like safer and more peaceful, and that's
Hmm.
kind of one of the perks of Canada. Whereas
Yeah.
the US might have more money and so on, but one of the downfalls is that it's a lot more violent. And yet here we have evidence that suggests that actually Canada is more violent, at
I
least
wonder if we
when
if
you
we
take
if
murder
we
out of it.
if we took some things and started laying out a timeline for the past 10 years, homelessness, crime, opioid crisis, um, stolen cars, all these things, and just started laying them out over the past 10 years and seeing like food bank usage, all that kind of stuff, and seeing
Yeah,
what that chart looks like. That'd be interesting.
certainly immigration and population and house prices and all that.
Yeah.
That's an awful
Yeah.
lot, isn't there?
And
It's
then
been a tough 10 years.
who's running the country? Just lay that on there too, right?
Coincidentally, I think it's a chap called Justin Trudeau.
Interesting. Interesting to say the least. Um, Zuckerberg. I know when Donald Trump that attempted assassination, his remarks the next day was like, "That's a tough guy," and Zuckerberg spent a lot of money in 2020 so that Trump didn't get elected, and all of a sudden he's dining at Mar-a-Lago. Sounds like Mar-a-Lago is where everybody's going these days.
Yeah, it's a kind of. I'm trying to think back. I mean, I know Roosevelt had kind of like a manor, didn't he, of his own, and so
Yeah,
did the Kennedys. Actually, they had that one, didn't they, in Massachusetts, wherever it is. We haven't had something like that in a while, though, where they have an independent power base.
Yeah.
It's like a sort of an old noble from the Middle Ages or
Well,
something.
even the first lady now, or the incoming first lady, said that she doesn't really have any interest in moving to the White House. She'll stay at Mar-a-Lago. And it's interesting that, like when they did that lawsuit too, that they were saying that he overvalued Mar-a-Lago and said it was only worth like $19 million. I'm sure there'd be a lot of people lined up to buy that for $19 million.
Well, it's going to become inevitably, isn't it? It's going to become part of American history, I would say. There's
Yeah,
probably a good chance that in 100 years it'll be like a museum if somebody can afford to buy
I
it
would
off
say
Trump's
so.
heirs.
Especially if he delivers on his promise to bring in the golden age for the United States of America. Interesting
But
though,
even
like even the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan, um, who hadn't met him ever in 8 years, and Trump and her exchanged some pretty rough stuff. Like she wrote a bunch of stuff against him, and she finally met him and says that he's charming and funny.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue to the contrary, isn't it? Even if you despise his politics, he is clearly like one of a kind, isn't he? And he is an entertainer. There's a reason that he had like a hugely successful TV show. That doesn't happen to just anybody. You have to have a
Yeah.
certain amount of charm and charisma, don't you? And obviously he has that.
So
I
that
find it
image
odd
that
that anybody would deny that.
yeah, the image that the media painted of him, not all media, but a lot of the media that painted him to be this basically demonic, end of democracy type person. It's either he's changed or they've changed. Something's changed.
Yeah. Well, you've seen a lot of people now, and Zuckerberg is an example of that. I mean, there are many, many others who, now that he's won, they're changing their tune a little bit, aren't they? Because I
Well,
think
I mean, a lot of the billionaires out of Silicon Valley, for sure, like Bill Ackman, Chamath, and all these people said, like they had even Joe Rogan. They had all these preconceptions of him, and then when they finally got to meet him and sit down with him, they're just like, huh, maybe it's
But I
not what
think
they say.
times have changed as well, haven't they? People refer to the Overton window a lot, don't they? Like the Overton window of what's considered to be acceptable in
Hmm.
sort of mainstream society. That has
Yeah.
definitely shifted, and in large part because of him and Elon Musk. So I think now we're hearing an awful lot less about how he said certain things a number of years ago or whatever. We're not really hearing about that anymore, and I think that's because that window has shifted, and
Hmm.
people really just aren't that bothered anymore when he says something that infuriates MSNBC presenters.
Yeah, and then more than a dozen people crossed from Canada and the U.S. in that run up to the Trump threat. So that's just more proof of what's going on. 16 people were caught crossing illegally into the U.S. from Canada. They were from India, Colombia, Mexico, and Guatemala.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big question is how do you stop it? I mean, the most sort of likely outcome that I've seen is that drones will be deployed en masse. I think that's probably the only way, isn't it? Sort of like night vision and drones, because the border is just quite ridiculous.
Yeah.
Even in that part where it's most densely populated, which is what this story refers to, like the New York Vermont area where that meets with Quebec. That's where like the most people live, almost, isn't it? Except for maybe Vancouver and the
Yeah.
border in that area, and yet that's where people cross, and that just tells you how hard it is to actually identify people when they
Well, it
try and
seems
sneak
like
through.
like Trump made those threats, and the Mexican president, she came on and said, like she responded, but then all of a sudden she's like, we're going to stop the tide of the migrants coming into the United States, and Justin says he's going to listen to. So I mean, say what you will about his threats, they seem to have got some attention.
Well, the Mexican president has already kind of backtracked a bit on that, has it? Or she's rejected what Trump said, how he characterized their conversation. She said, we don't have an open border actually, and we really try and everything that we try and do, it within the framework of human rights,
Yeah.
which is a bit of a dampener on things, I suppose, because human rights, so called, whatever that actually means, that is why when people cross into the US with obviously bogus claims of persecution somewhere, when they demand asylum, it's human rights that makes it possible for them to actually end up being residents there in the US eventually. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the obstacle, and we're seeing that in Europe too. When these people go over on dinghies to England, I mean, they have like prima facie ridiculous claims for asylum. They're obviously lying, but because of various human rights treaties, it's processed, and they end up being citizens of the United Kingdom eventually in the long run.
And out of the Associated Press, the White House is pressing Ukraine to lower the draft age to 18 years old, because currently now it's 25 years old. So again, the Biden administration seems to be in the last 60 days trying to ramp up this war effort with Ukraine. They've given them the ability to launch long-range missiles into Russia, and that which prompted Michael Moore, a long-time Democrat, to say, "What are you doing, Biden? You're going to make your legacy of the starting World War III." But here it is again with saying they want to lower the age to 18 because there's not enough men at the front lines to fight. So they want to
Yeah, I
send
mean, I
they
think
want to send kids.
much younger people fought in the First World War and the Second World War, of
Yeah,
course.
no, for
But I
sure.
mean, if you look, I mean, if you read between the lines of everything that's happened in the last month or so with Ukraine and Russia, it suggests that Ukraine is pretty close to defeat, I think. And I mean, it's hard, isn't it? How do you deal with that? Because nobody except Russia wants Russia to win. I think pretty much
Well,
in
yeah, I
many
mean,
North
I
Korea.
interviewed recently the Friends of Kiev was a man that came in, and he's from Kiev, and he said if you walk around in Kiev right now, there is no man. He said, like most of them either dead or at the front lines, and he said he was personally looking forward to the Trump administration and hopefully somebody talking about peace because too many lives have been lost already. So that was an interesting take from somebody there. Whereas, like there's been this thing, do you want, like fighting for democracy? But I mean, how many children have to be offered up for this fight for democracy?
Yeah, well, it's just catastrophic, this whole thing, isn't it? It's an absolutely devastating event, and the Russian economy now looks, I mean, we've heard this all before, but it looks like it really is kind of creaking a bit now. And these two countries that, we talk about demographics now and then, these two countries are some of the worst on the planet for demographics, and they both, for many, many years now, have been panicking about how few people they have and
Mm.
how low their birth rate is. And then they've had this war and they've lost, well, nobody really knows, but I think it's safe to say hundreds of thousands of men,
Yeah.
which is enormous for these countries because they don't really produce many young people anymore. So they've lost, it's a colossal loss, and it's just such a shame that it's happened, really, and that they couldn't have just negotiated this
I just
back
find
in
it
the day.
odd that the White House is dictating to them, that you need to send more, like you lower the age and send more of your young men to the front line. It's just odd.
Yeah, well, I suppose the US and NATO more broadly is kind of in the driver's seat with Ukraine because Ukraine would not be able to fight this war without NATO.
Which
So I guess that gives them a big say.
kind of like for those people that have the argument that the United States is not involved and it's not a proxy war, kind of like defeats that argument, right?
Yeah, I don't know who is saying that. It's pretty obviously
I've heard them say it
that's
many
exactly what it
times.
is.
I've heard them say it many times. Anyway,
Yeah, well,
moving on. Tragic situation there for sure. Happy Thanksgiving to our friends and neighbors to the south of us, right? As they look to celebrate Thanksgiving, and they got the
they
big
have to have
turkey
it
on
on
the
a
table
different
there.
day, don't they?
What's that?
They've got to have it on a different day, haven't they?
And then, of course, yeah, they have a different Thanksgiving than we do. And then the big day that everybody waits for, even in Canada, Black Friday happens tomorrow, and there's a lot of Black Friday sales right now. A lot of people, I think, looking to take advantage of Black Friday. That they buying their gifts and different things. It's usually the biggest retail day of the year, and then Cyber Monday follows Black Friday.
Some of it is, you know, not quite as good a deal as they make out, though. I think as you might expect, they do kind of exploit the frenzy a bit. Some of the retailers,
I mean,
and they offer
I
you products that aren't actually lower price.
I do find that if you're looking for sales, they tend to be the best sales of the year. Like depending on, if you have something that you're looking to buy, that tends to be like better than Boxing Day, in my mind, in my opinion, for sure.
Yeah, and well, one of the things I've noticed, Amazon obviously go crazy for it, and any of the products that they sell under their own brand, like I mean, they're verifiably lower price because you can
Yeah.
kind of easily see what their prices usually are.
And
So I find that it
Costco,
works with that.
yeah,
Yeah,
and Costco gets into it too, and they don't typically run a lot of sales, right? So they do some
yeah.
markdowns sometimes, right?
It's always a sale at Costco, isn't it?
Yeah,
150 hot
it's
dog.
always on sale. So here, Black Friday comes prior to the GST holiday that like the liberals have passed. There was a good segment on CBC about that, and the young man broke it down and saying, like it's not as much as they make it out to be, because a lot of those things, like the provinces have HST, that would be Ontario and some of the Atlantic provinces. A lot of those goods are already HS or the PST free, like on kids' clothing and stuff like that. There is no HST on it, so it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors in that regard too. Good segment to
Yeah.
watch on the CBC there.
Still, I would say again, here I am in the position of defending our dear leader, but it's still, it still will save people some money at least, maybe a lot less than they might be expecting. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think he worked it out to be less than, like, over the 2 months, less than a couple $100. So
yeah, better than a kick in the you know where, but
yeah,
still.
so you were saying that before we went on that it looks like they've abandoned their $250 check so far too.
Yep, because Jagmeet said no. The big man, Ottawa's kingpin, said he wanted it to be changed. So the Liberals said, forget about it then. And maybe they'll try and do it again later, but yeah, they're just trying
Yeah.
to maneuver around the NDP, which really does highlight, doesn't it? Like, this is not a good situation. Like, this government is so feeble in terms of its ability to get anything through Parliament. It's kind of it's pretty desperate stuff, isn't it? They just can't do anything without the assent of a minority fringe party. It's a pretty bonkers way to govern.
So there's an interesting little tweet that I found out there. There's that big deal about Peanut the squirrel that they came and exterminated just prior to the election. They seem to want to just a squirrel and a raccoon by that one, but this new doctor that got named by Trump has put out this thing like that. This is AI generated, like like we don't want to see the revenge from Peanut's relatives here, so let's try to end this war and live in peace with the squirrels.
Yeah, well, he's in the administration. I can't remember what job he's been nominated for, but he's gonna be in it.
Yeah, he was the one that was blowing the whistle on the COVID stuff. Remember, like there was all that the Barrington files and that, right? So
Yeah, and he was represented as a conspiracy theorist and a kind of
yeah,
somebody that had lost his marbles, wasn't he? And he
yeah,
was made persona non grata.
yeah.
And
And
yet,
he's a Stanford doctor.
yeah, I mean, there were many cases like that. I think he was probably the most prominent one. Though I seem to remember there's also a guy in Singapore, Malaysia, or something like that, who was similarly kind of non-personed. But we're in
Yeah,
a strange time now where, like, this guy who not so long ago was excluded and
yeah. Well,
marginalized is now going
if
to
you
be in power.
if you like somebody attacking him, you can go watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC go through a rant about him. So if that
Yeah.
interests you.
Or you could not if
Yeah.
you like to preserve your mental health.
There you go. Let's switching our focus a little bit to Kelowna. A new store is opening here in Kelowna, and it's in the old Centurion, or not old, the Centurion place where there used to be, I think, Nestor's Market, right? It's Kelowna's first no frills. It's under the Loblaws brand, though, right? The Superstore, and I think they have a couple other brands. No frills. I don't know what that means, but there you go. So you got President's Choice, Loblaws, Real Canadian Superstore, and now the No Frills. They got that yellow, the same yellow though. That's the common theme with Superstore and President's Choice, and they got the one at the Capri Mall, stuff like that. So you can use your PC Optimum card there. No Frills meaning what? I'm not sure.
Have you never been?
Well,
It's
this is
just kind of all the products have that like yellow
Yeah,
They have that yellow wrapping,
wrapping.
and it's just like, yeah, just like black letters on the
Well,
front. Yeah.
when I was going to college, our cupboards were full of yellow. That's all we had. We
Yeah.
couldn't
When I was in
afford KD.
Vancouver, that was my favorite store. When I was
Yeah,
in
we couldn't
impoverished
afford
Perth.
KD, so we would buy the yellow boxes of mac and cheese, and I think that $3 pizzas back then, and then we would just add a little bit extra cheese on it if we were feeling that we were having a good week, right? So I mean, we had a
$3 pizzas.
young child going to college, trying to do the best we could. So had a job that started at 3:30 in the morning, working for the Edmonton Journal, and just making it go. And we'd go shopping in the superstore there, and they used to have that $250 off or $50 off or something like that if you bought $250 of the groceries. So we had to make sure just get to 250, right? So
Wow.
there you go.
Every single visit nowadays is about that, isn't it?
And, you know, you can't buy much for 250 now, right?
Yeah, I mean, even no frills, it is cheaper, but it's not gonna
Yeah.
save you, I don't think.
Rogers Sugar, I reported this morning, uh, exceeded. Sugar's doing well. How's that?
Good time to rock
Good times
teeth.
for good times for sugar. Um, Big news out of Kelowna too. Kelowna got awarded the Memorial Cup. I think that's a kind of like a reward for us losing the Mem Cup during COVID. So there you go. We can play a little clip of that.
Will host the 2026 Memorial Cup. And the president and general manager of the Kelowna Rockets, Bruce Hamilton, couldn't be happier.
I'm really excited, but I'm really happy for our two chairs, Steve Thompson and Dave Rush, the amount of work that them and the committee put into presenting this bid. And then it went to an independent committee to select it. It was not the Western Hockey League. There's 5 different people that were on this selection committee, and they made the decision. And the other side of it is having the city as our partners was massive because the building had to be guaranteed that it was going to meet the standards of the CHL, and the city stepped up and guaranteed that it would, which otherwise we probably wouldn't.
There you go. That was Bruce Hamilton, the Kelowna Rockets. Happy to get the Memorial Cup. It's good news for the city of Kelowna. It brings in lots of money, brings in lots of interest, and Mem Cup is obviously a cool thing. I've watched a lot of junior hockey. We used to bill it Kelowna Rockets. It's great hockey and a good value for your money to watch some really good hockey. And the Kelowna Rockets have put a lot of players in the NHL. And then the next one we're going to show you is this is the Beyond the Ballot. Renee, Merrifield, and I, every Tuesday, we do a Beyond the Ballot. We look at everything from international to provincial to federal politics, even some municipal sometimes. And we're going to play a little clip from this. Went out to Canada and Mexico.
Well, I thought it was really interesting. You know, he didn't do it through his normal, or is it his normal, right? This might be the new normal, which is it was actually a post on a tweet. And I want to read it because I think it's really, I think it's something that we as Canadians need to take note of. But I'll try and go as quickly as I can. And this is what he says. As everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico composed of thousands of people seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as, and I think this is the most important, drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily resolve this long simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time as they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price.
There you go. You can go watch that full video and story on Kelowna Now. You listened to that, didn't you, Renee? Or sorry, Ian?
I did to some of it, yeah. And she's as insightful as ever. I would recommend it.
Yeah, she's very sharp and astute on politics, and she shares a lot of stuff that, you know, like from somebody that's was actually in it, right? So it's great to have her on a regular basis on Kelowna Now. Liberal candidate in by-election seeks, I again, her identity's been questioned. She said she was Métis, and then she's been called out, and now she's saying, oh, she's going to seek that Métis membership, and then there's been some calls for her to resign as well from even running.
Yeah, second Liberal in a few weeks to be accused of faking ancestry. The Randy Boissonneau was the other fella, wasn't he? I mean, I find this, coming from, as I do, growing up in another country, I find this completely surreal. One of the weirdest things about Canada, that there are people, in effect, demanding that you take something like a DNA test to prove your ethnicity. It's kind of, I'm not sure Canadians are aware how weird that is, how absolutely bizarre that is.
Yeah, but perhaps it's because because they're taking advantage. Like maybe in England, there's not as much people taking advantage of some of the what they consider like political clout by claiming these things that can't be substantiated.
But then the immediate retort would be, why is there a political system set up here in Canada where there are advantages gained based on your DNA? Is that a good way to run a country?
Yeah,
not in my opinion.
Right? And then another video, we had Gavin Dew in, one of the new BC Conservatives, and he said that David Eby's curled up and hiding in a ball, hiding under his desk. We're going to play a clip from that. How are you guys going to make sure you get that information?
I think accountability starts with having a legislature that is functioning and is in session. So if you look at what's happening right now, you have an NDP government that got elected. They got to work for just long enough to give themselves almost a $2 million pay hike in additional.
There you go. And we're back. You watched that one as well, did you not, Ian?
Yeah, and I wrote a story about it. He and John Rustad are trying to goad David Eby into a concession so that they can claim a win straight away. And they're trying to get him to come back to convene the Legislative Assembly earlier than his plan. Yeah.
Interesting. Worth your time to watch, though, for sure. So you go on clonanow.com and you can find that story and video. And our meme of the day. You ready for the meme of the day? I think we used this one a while ago, but I thought it was fitting because of all the stuff that's going on in tech. There's the EU with the bare cupboards talking about their tech sector.
You can never kick the EU enough. I think we should have every day. We should have an EU meme. I think.
You'd think that, but the EU has not contributed a lot in the technology sector. If you look at all the big tech companies in the world, can you name any that have EU roots?
Well, we discussed it before, didn't we? Spotify. Spotify's the only one that comes to mind for me.
Is that really tech, I guess? But yeah, sure.
I think so. I think you would call it that. I mean, anything that's on most people's iPhones as an app, probably you would say is part of like the tech world, isn't it?
Anything else you got? Google? No. Facebook? No.
Yeah, there aren't really many, are there? But the saddest thing of all is that it's undeniable that the modern world and all the technology that we have was basically created by Europe. If you go back far enough, and then look how far they've fallen. They just can't do anything. The space system doesn't really function.
Doesn't exist. But I would say that their automotive sector was one of their big strengths, but it seems to be falling apart, like literally falling apart at the seams. With Volkswagen closing plants, talking about, like maybe not being there. BMW, Mercedes, all in trouble. Those are like, some of the top brands in the world. Porsche, Ferrari.
Yeah. Well, less glamorous and less kind of visible is also Germany's like chemicals industry, which is huge, isn't it? They have a very sophisticated and very important chemicals industry, and obviously that's very energy intensive, and they don't have any energy anymore because the combination of maniacs in their own country that destroy their nuclear power.
Pharma definitely one of the, I think, where they've concentrated, because Ozempic comes out of the EU, right?
Yeah, that's Denmark, which is not like the most pro EU of EU countries.
But I mean, they don't allow you to give it to people for certain things, but you can in America, right? So
They
interesting,
also
right?
sell it for like 5 or 6, 10 times whatever it is the price, don't they? Because they know they can get it out of the Americans.
It's interesting for sure. Let's switch our focus to the markets. Gold again, just chopping around there, kind of hanging up over the $2,600 mark, looking for direction. I think just going to chop for a while. I think it might chop into the new year. Um, I don't no real catalyst one way or the other. So I think that you can see where it kind of lost its steam with the Trump election and the U.S. dollar gaining strength. And I think that'll continue. Again, the market has voted very strongly in favor of Donald Trump in his next 4 years. The market is definitely shining again on when we looked at crypto, we look at Bitcoin. It looks like it's going to try and take another run at that $100,000 mark. Tough psychological barrier for sure. But will it make that run before the new year? I likely. You can see the way it's kind of chopping around there too, right? So, but I guess the environment for crypto has never been better with the Donald Trump administration. And
But
then
then
we
I
look
guess
at
it'll be quite sensitive to any statements that he makes pro or con in the next few
sounds like
years.
it's all going to be pro. So, and then we look at the Canadian to USD chart. It looks like it's in trouble for sure. Again, the USD gaining strength and the Canadian dollar, which is going to put a damper on the expected rate cuts, right? It's going to be tough to cut when the dollar's falling, right? Because any rate cut will lead to more weakness in the Canadian dollar. So this is a tough thing for Trudeau and the Bank of Canada because they want to stimulate the economy because they've choked it so badly with these rate increases and like mortgages and all that, and they've choked off housing, and then here they are going to try and stimulate again by lowering rates, and then with the strength of the USD and our, I guess, reluctance to tap into our resource sector, which would add strength to the Canadian dollar, we just see a downward pressure on the Canadian dollar.
Yeah, and as usual with everything to do with Canada, we almost have to, before we say anything or do anything, we have to look over our shoulder, don't we? See what America's up to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's to me, it's another example of how limited sovereignty actually is in the 21st century.
Well,
It's kind
yeah,
of
I mean, Kevin O'Leary says it best. I mean, a lot of people say it. We are one of the, it's pretty obvious, we are one of the richest resource nations in the world. And you just look at our resources, you look at our stock market, it's dominated by resource type stocks. And we have a management in place right now that is reluctant, actually anti-resource. And it's kind of like really hurting the Canadian dollar, really hurting the Canadians in general in the grocery store, and that, and a lower Canadian dollar will not help anything. Well, maybe it'll help tourism. People will come to Canada because everything will be cheap. Maybe Americans will come and start buying houses. I don't know, but our dollar keeps falling, and there's some of the banks in Canada are calling for it to maybe even go as low as 60 cents, which would be pretty tough for a lot of Canadians when they're buying a lot of their fruits and vegetables out of the United States or other countries.
certainly wouldn't help with negotiations with Trump either, would it? If we were coming at it from such a weak position.
Yeah, there was a time not recently, just recently, when the Canadian dollar was actually above the American dollar. I think it was at $1.10
During the Harper times, wasn't it?
Yeah. Again, it'd be interesting to see how this all plays out with when they call an election, because it would change dramatically. The resource sector, Danielle Smith is pushing hard, Scott Moe pushing hard to utilize the resources that are beneath our feet.
I mean, we should say the Liberals would argue, if we could conjure them up right now to speak to us, they would argue that they have actually been in favour of the resource sector, and that they bought the pipeline and they got that through, and that they also have this big fancy plan to extract minerals But then they would say, but we have to balance that with our concerns about climate change. So just to imagine what their counter argument would be for a second.
Yeah, well, their actions speak louder than their words. How's that?
Yeah, the cap, I think that the cap is unambiguously in the sort of anti category, isn't it? And
Yeah, I mean,
it's
their
quite a
actions, I
dramatic
mean,
thing to say.
you just have to look at the relationships between Alberta and the feds, and you can see the actions speak louder than the words.
Yeah, and when you consider that Alberta, that's kind of synonymous in many ways with Canada's hydrocarbon industry, isn't it? And if they're upset, then that means the industry's upset. Yeah, pretty much.
If the power didn't change in Alberta with Daniel Smith, Canada might be in a worse position right now, because Daniel Smith is at least fighting hard to promote the interests of Canada's resource sector.
Yeah, and she's also pro-Canada. When you listen to what she says, she doesn't want, like some sort of, I guess you would call them extremists in Alberta, she doesn't want to split off and go and be in an independent country or anything like that. No. She wants Canada to change to be more friendly with Alberta, doesn't she? Because she sees that as beneficial for the whole country.
She may well be a future Prime Minister of Canada. She's very passionate lady, very smart, very articulate, and very powerful lady, and well-spoken as well.
Yeah, we'll have to watch her, because she's quite young, isn't she, in political terms? So she's definitely one to watch.
Yeah, and you can see that her approval rating, 91% when she was challenged. They said that she was going to lose her leadership, and clearly that's not the case. There you go. Anything else you want to talk about today, Ian? Oh, we got one more for you. We got Optimus here. We got a couple more actually. We got Optimus here. He can now catch a ball. Check this out. We're gonna play this little clip here. There you go. I think we got to see if they can whip the ball at him and see if he can catch that.
What did he do though? Mr. Optimus, he put it against his head, didn't he? Was he giving it a sniff? A robo sniff?
No idea. But anyway, that's pretty good. So looking forward to getting my Optimus at my house. And then we got another little picture here to show you in our EV lineup there, showing you what the Cybercab is going to look like. And it's got those gull wing doors, reminiscent of a Lamborghini or a Bricklin, the old Canadian-built Bricklin from Back to the Future. I think Elon is really about trying to tie in the old with the new. Like if you even look at his model lineups, like he tried to tie into like Henry Ford's Model T, Model Y, Model 3. The naming conventions, and he's all about these naming conventions, right?
Yeah, he's a funny one. Like the drill that he has as well, Proof Rock. That's named after a T.S. Eliot poem. It's a bit high-minded. I didn't realize he was into T.S. Eliot.
He's definitely into all those weird names, like his car lineup. I think most people know it's sexy. It's S3XY.
Actual self-summon.
Yeah, actual self-summon. Tap your, I think he says that, like tap your actual self-summon. The Texas Institute of Technology School, which he's building in Texas. He's definitely, I think, entertains himself with his sense of humor.
Well, he's a happy little fella, isn't he? Which is a rare thing. Like usually they're so solemn, people in positions of power like him. They're usually like, I mean, just watch like the Federal Reserve or something like that. The way they speak, it's like they just make you want to jump out the window.
He's the biggest fan of his own jokes, 100%.
Yeah, but I think that's part of his like cult and part of his fan club is that he has this kind of optimism and chirpiness, and I think people respond very well to that.
I honestly believe that we are situated with technology to an age of abundance, and it's about time we look at an age of abundance as opposed to current governments that have really been trying to teach us or control us with fear and scarcity. I mean, the messages that we get, especially from our current government, is it's all about fear and scarcity, right? So, and that's what we get too, right? So they tell us about scarcity, and that's what we get. That's why we have people lining up for food banks and everything, because and the fear and division that they've driven into people. It's time for people to start working together and start finding solutions to a better tomorrow.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? but scarcity. It's funny when you mention that. If you look back through history, scarcity is one of the main ways that people in power have controlled the people beneath them, isn't it? It's a pretty obvious thing to say,
Yeah,
but it's certainly
because
true.
it's hard to control people that feel that they don't need anything. Do you know what I mean? It's really hard when they're just like, I don't need anything. You know what I mean? Elon Musk doesn't need anything. It's hard to control, right? Do you know what I mean? Like it's hard to make him do things, but it's really easy to control somebody that has to stand in line for bread.
Yeah. Well, another example would be kind of like the American West in the 19th century, which is, famous for that frontier spirit, and that it was almost like an anarchy, wasn't it, where they ran their own affairs. And that was, that's like a perfect example of people being free because they have everything they need and they didn't need the government. They were actually very hostile to the government, weren't they?
Yeah. I still like Ronald Reagan's best line: "The government should be afraid of you, the voter, not the voter scared of the government." And then we need to get back to that place.
Yeah, well, in many ways, he was the descendant of that. It's ironic because he did do a lot of westerns, didn't he?
He did.
He actually acted in a lot of westerns where that is the philosophy, and then he kind of encapsulated that into that phrase.
I think his other famous saying was, he said, "You should be afraid of this when you hear, we're from the government, we're here to help."
Yeah, and he was also very famous for saying that he wanted to make America great again, which we've heard a lot of lately from another fella that pawned it from him.
I always find that funny, like how the anti-MAGA movement or whatever, how they try to turn that to make America great again. Sounds like, why wouldn't every American want that? I mean, make America great. Sounds like a good theme, but it seems like they've turned that into a dirty word. So I don't know. There you go.
I think it's the last word. It's the last word in that phrase that people object to.
It's the last word. Is that what it is?
It already is great. Doesn't need to be that
Oh, there
again.
you go. See, I missed that then.
I think so.
Okay.
Because they say it's already great. You can't do it again if it already is great.
Well, there you go. We learned something today, or I did anyway. With that said, we thank you for watching Kelowna Now.